to humanity. This will be episode 8. Again, this channel is designed to promote human unity and to encourage the development of greater social harmony. The chief aim of this channel is to challenge the entrenched us versus them thinking that has been prevalent throughout the history of this country. In the previous episode, which was part 2 of the SOS, we introduced we look further at the SOS in terms of how uh, slurs and how um, antiquated terms have served to kind of preserve the unconscious conditioning from the focus that it really deserves. And so in this part 3, we're going to look at how social data also tends to insulate the SOS from scrutiny and from revamping that is definitely necessary so that we can experience greater um, human unity and harmony. And so we're going to look at the dangers of social data. And we'll start with some um, food for thought. Given that our focus will be on socioeconomic data, data like, for example, poverty, series, education, attainment, employment, and such, we we want to point out that data can be presented in many different ways. You can many creative ways of presenting social data to the larger society. And the method or the techniques used can, if not if care isn't properly exercised, can really create kind of false senses of reality. And in the process of doing so, can preserve thinking that is typically uh, wrong directed. And so, so one of the dangers of how data is presented is that if it's presented in a way that is not really reflective of reality, then social tension that is prevalent in the country tends to be maintained. So we really have to be careful in terms of how we're presenting data and what that data truly represents. And so given, the prevalence of presenting data on a false colorized basis, we want to look at some implications related to that. Data is published in this country and has been published in this country um, for many since basically the inception of this country, and it's published by some government institutions and non-government organizations. And the way the data is presented, it tends to reinforce and maintain a lot of the notions involving a human hierarchy. In fact, the data, because of its consistent manner of presentation, serves as a fuel source, if you will, for the SOS. And so we want to look at how data can, in fact, contribute to the maintenance of non-human unity. Larger subgroups or a subgroup have advantages because of their size, and because of their size, you can present data involving them in ways that make them look falsely superior, if you will. And at the other end of the spectrum, the smaller subgroups, because of their relatively small subpopulations, are kind of disadvantaged, as I will attempt to demonstrate. Some more issues with the colorization approach of economic data. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, these approaches, this of using colorized data, it serves to maintain the social tension that is running rampantly throughout our country and seems to be intensifying. And so that social tension is really where subgroups, these artificially subgroups of people, are pitted against each other, and they're fighting to try and get, what they believe is the appropriate amount of policy relief, whatever the social issue in question may be. As a result of this infighting, you have all types of stereotypical conjectures. This is where, like, the slurs can get their nourishment, claims of favoritism, and other types of cries for help that are resulting from this data deception. The data is presented, it's officially sanctioned by, government authorities, and so it's perceived to be, you know, re- reflecting the true reality of society. But unfortunately, this infighting within the human family, Americans against Americans, it continues, and is being continued or promoted by the way the data is depicted. And so the way information is depicted on a social level in this country really needs to be reimagined. And I want to try and create a very simple example to try and flush out some of the principles that one would find if one studied, actual data in a lot of detail. I spent quite a few years of my life looking at economic data, and so I want to try and bring to the forefront some of the observations that I discovered. So you have two groups in society, in a simple society. Say we'll call one group Group A, and the other group we'll call it Group B. And clearly, Group A is bigger than Group B. It's 4 times bigger. Okay, so the the data here is addressing some sort of social issue, and we look at the total impact of this social issue. 400 persons from Group A are affected by it, and 200 persons from Group B are affected by it. So in totality, you have 600 people affected by some social issue. Now, if you look at the percent total, the percent of the subpopulation, Group A's percent is 10%. You know, 400 out of the 4,000 is 10% of his group is affected by the social issue. And by the same token, Group B percent total is 20% because 200 of its 1,000 members are affected by the social issue. And so the the challenge then becomes, well, where should the focus be? Should the focus be on those who are actually affected by the social issue, or should it be on the impact on each respective group? And that's where I think the disconnect occurs. For example, if you look at the percent totals, Group B's 20% is twice that of Group A. But when you look at those persons who are affected by the social issue, only 33%, that is 200 of the 600 total, of Group B's are affected. So you have this kind of conflict. And, an assumption needs to be made. And this is the assumption that I am making in terms of the presentation. And that is that any human being, whether it's Group A or Group B or whatever group, that if they are affected by the social issue or some social issue, then those persons should be targeted for relief. They should be given top priority. So, it's this ideal of treating each individual that is suffering, treating them the same. And the objective would be to get them as much relief as possible. And so this is kind of stepping outside of the grouping and just looking at people suffering. A couple observations need to be made. First of all, looking at the bigger group, Group A, given its larger size relative to Group B, the current presentation format virtually guarantees that this group will be deemed superior with respect to this social issue in question. That is, what's going to grab the headlines is only 10% of its subpopulation is affected. And so 10% of course compared to 20% is clearly better. And this lower percentage, which implies less impact, is going to transmit the notion of being superior throughout the larger society. And that notion then gets to serve as nutrients for the collective unconscious. And so Group A is looked at as being superior with respect to this social issue in question. The problem is that this conditioning, which is based strictly on the percentage of subpopulation, is used in lieu of the fact that 67% of the persons affected by the social issue are found in this group. So you're substituting an impact on the overall population, which is going to be smaller in this case than the total number of persons within that subpopulation that are affected by the social issue. And so this is one of the dangers is that, what you choose to emphasize in terms of releasing the information to the larger society will serve to create an illusion in terms of how that group is actually faring. In the case of the other group, Group B, which is the smaller group, the results are kind of just the opposite. Because of its smaller size relative to Group A, um, again, it's going to be deemed, its behavior will be deemed inferior compared to uh, Group A because, again, the headlines will focus on the percentage of its subpopulation. So 20% of its subpopulation is affected by the social issue. And that kind of inferior kind of result gets transmitted through the larger society. And these rankings based on subpopulation percentages rarely change in terms of one period Group A is better, the next period Group B is better. They tend to be entrenched, and so the transmission of the information, the signaling tends to be consistent, and so the as a result of this inferior kind of result or assumed result, stereotyping and other types of social irritants are levied against the smaller group. And what gets lost in the process is that um, the smaller percentage of persons affected by the social issue, in this case 33%, that is they're found in group B. But again, the headline thing, the information that's transmitted to the larger society is that 20% of the Group B's subpopulation is affected by the social issue. Now, if we try to correct for this notion of relative size, Group A compared to Group B, then that too causes some problems. For example, if I just focus on the total number of persons that are affected by the social issue. That is the 400 for Group A and the 200 for Group B. If I just focus on those affected, which is where the emphasis should be, we find that removing both of the subpopulation totals and depicting the the depicted percentages, it gives us more laser precision in terms of how pervasive is the social issue in question. Now, the problem is that when you strip out the subgroup totals and the percentage of those subgroup totals, now the signaling gets switched. Now group A is looked at as being the harbinger of the brunt of the social issue. So group A would lose its superior kind of ranking that it had under the previous chart. So it switches things. So as long as you have groups and you're comparing them to each other, there's going to be this issue of better or worse, for better or worse. And so we simply are reversing the problem. We're making Group A now look inferior, whereas before Group B was perceived as being inferior. So how can we quell that tension? Because the notions of better than or worse than is going to contribute to the development of tension. What if we just look at the total number of persons affected by the social issue, irrespective of grouping, irrespective of subgroup size? We just focus on the people that are suffering. And if we do that, this is humanizing. It's taking out the effects of grouping, which is the fundamental problem in this country, and it's helping us to see precisely how many people are suffering. And so this approach is just identifying and presenting all the persons that are being negatively impacted by a social issue is the most humanizing, because there you eliminate the the need for subgroup infighting, because the subgrouping arrangement has been removed. You remove the illusion of how one group is performing relative to the other, because the subgrouping has been removed. And so you then put the attention clearly where it belongs, on those persons that are suffering. And so by doing so, the the tension shifts from infighting between artificially created subgroups, and it then places the the focus on the effectiveness of policymaking. How effective are our leaders in terms of alleviating the suffering of these human beings? And this way, we can take information, force it to focus on our humanity, and it has nothing to do with face or place or anything like that. It has to do with how can we help each other when some of our family members, the human family, are suffering. And so by stripping out, subgrouping, by stripping out, this ranking approach, we can then look within the human family and try to come up with ways to reduce the suffering of anyone, irregardless of whether it's light brown or dark brown. All right, so that's the some of the problems that you encounter when you're studying socioeconomic data, the bigger groups tend to have um, the advantage when it comes to how they are performing in the context of a social issue. And the way to humanize things is simply to remove the grouping framework and just focus on people, human beings, and try to help those who are suffering. So, if you were challenged by the content of this episode, if you feel compelled to like, please do so. If you have comments or suggestions, feel free to share those. But most importantly, please share the content so that we can start to think about ways to create more unity in terms of how we address suffering with respect to social issues and how we can kind of treat those social issues in a way that considers every human who is involved in a way that equally values them. So until next time, remember, we are humanity, and a united tomorrow must start today. Take care.